Let's pull up the CodeNext item, number 111. You want to make a motion?
Move passage of item 111.
Mr. Flanagan moves passage of item number 111. Is there a second to that? Mr. Renteria seconds that. Do we want to hear from the people who have signed up to speak? There are 5. Councilmember Alter?
I have a small amendment that I want to put forward that just adds the Austin's Watershed Protection Master Plan to the list of plans in the be it further resolved that has Imagine Austin, et cetera, in it, and I'll pass that out.
Any objection to adding the watershed master plan to the list of things that's been consistent with? Hearing none, that amendment is added. So if you would pass that down to everybody, but especially to our clerk and our council. All right, so do we want to hear from the people who are speaking, or do you want to lay out your amendments first? Councilor Poole?
I just passed out, and I forgot to hand one to the clerk. Thank you, the city attorney, for doing that. This is a slight change from the resolution that I posted on the message board. I essentially removed the portion about having the city auditor, directing the city auditor to do a review because of time constraints, but I'll look at bringing that back separately at another meeting that we can talk about it more. But this just adds a little bit more discussion in a whereas clause, and the Watershed Protection Master Plan is also in here that Councilmember Alter had requested, and then incorporates any recommendation the city manager may derive from the findings in any future city auditor's special report that may be undertaken. So that tees up a possibility of us requesting that from the city auditor and finding room on her schedule. I don't believe these are controversial, but it'd be great to know. Thanks.
So while we're listening to the speakers, my only concern with that line, Councilmember Poole, is I'm not sure what the last line means, because I don't know what the recommendations are going to be. I certainly wouldn't mind the manager considering them, but I wouldn't want to direct him to incorporate something that we haven't seen on the dais or considered on the dais.
Okay. All right. So let me think about that, and I may amend it slightly. Okay,
but
thanks.
certainly for him to consider that kind of thing, I think would be good. All right. David
Mr. Mayor?
King? Yep.
Could I also make a comment?
I'm sorry?
Could I also make a comment?
Yes.
I would have the same comment. I also, when we get to talking about it, there's a whole range of people that the city manager will be needing to talk to, and so I want to be careful about loading up the be it resolved with those kinds of things. I'm happy to, instead of trying to amend this, I'm just happy to have a very brief conversation with the city manager in a minute when we get to it about that understanding. So,
all right, then, Mr. King, you want to come down and talk to us? Is Brad Parsons here? Why don't you come on down to the other podium so that you'll be straight up? And is Ray Collins here? Okay, you'll be up behind one of these two gentlemen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. I am here in a capacity as a citizen, although I'm a member of the Zoning and Planning Commission, as I believe you know, and so I'm not speaking on behalf of the Zoning and Planning Commission or my role on the commission in my following comments. I'm just asking that that we conduct that a stipulation be included in the resolution that directs the city manager to initiate a request for proposal process to hire an independent third party to conduct a root cause analysis of the CodeNext project failure. Having spent almost $8 million so far and hundreds of thousands of staff hours, which could equate to another $4 million, in total $12 million that we've invested in this process so far, we need to understand why it failed and not use political reasoning to explain why it failed. We need to look under the hood and learn from that. So our future projects are better and more effective. Private business does this all the time when big projects fail, because they care to learn. Because if they don't learn, they're going to fail. They're going to go out of business. And I think it's important for us to learn what happened through this CodeNext process. So I hope that you will do that, and we can learn from those what caused the failure of CodeNext. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Parsons, you're up now. Mr. Collins, you come down to this podium.
Yes, Mayor and Council. First off, I want to say that I think you're throwing this process out a little bit either too late or too early. I don't know, but it's a wasted effort. But and I'll come back to that. But what I want to maybe reiterate, and I'm Mr. King, I was glad he spoke. I just wanted to read their short, brief statement that ZAP passed a few days ago because I think it's pretty good, and then add something to that. They believe that learning from the mistakes are critical to avoid repeating them. Therefore, they recommend that the city engage an independent evaluation team to determine how the CodeNext process went wrong. No alternative process or reboot of CodeNext should be considered until the evaluation is complete and any recommendations for changes are implemented. Well, what I noticed is that it seemed like both the neighborhoods and RECA felt like their input into the CodeNext process was not being listened to. We ended up with a document that was longer and more complex than the current land development code, and yet it was worse. If you just want to listen to RECA, they felt it was worse. The problem there, I believe, was the lack of responsiveness of city staff. And so I think the consultants should be taken off of this and not used again. And I even think the staff leadership on this should not maybe be involved. Somebody else from the city manager's office, possibly. There also, when I said earlier, I thought you've quit prematurely, and maybe it's for an election. I don't know what the reason is. But there are some simple solutions, compromises that could have been come up with on minimum lot sizes, not allowing all the new commercial uses in residential zones, the density bonus. It's proposed only to be $2 per square foot. That's too low. It's not going to cover costs. Should be a minimum $4 per square foot for the density bonus. The parking requirements, one thing you can do is you can restrict parking in streets with signs. You don't necessarily have to change the minimum parking requirement, although that might be open for negotiation there. And then height compatibility, ZAP had a great solution, a compromise on height compatibility. That's just 5 issues I reeled off right there. That's, I believe, half of the problems. One other one is the process changes in CodeNext that took citizen input out of the process going future in zoning changes. That should not be done. It should remain similar to the process to what it is now. Presumably, you're going to need less zoning changes. So those are some of the things I want to say about that. I believe that you're giving up prematurely on CodeNext, but it was a convoluted, messed up process throughout because the city staff and the consultants were not responsive. So I guess you got to do what you got to do.
Thank you. Is Megan Meisenbach here? What about Shivas Watson? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Collinger, our last speaker.
City Manager Cronk, you're about to be in charge of whatever comes next after CodeNext. For your starting point, I recommend you go back to early 2015 when the first 10-1 council was considering the Zucker report. Find an unredacted copy. Considering what has happened with CodeNext, I'm pretty sure there were some important recommendations of which the Austin public were left in the dark about because they were unpopular with staff and council. I predict you will read there some things left undone that you will want to pursue, things that fit well with your role as the administrative head of our Austin city government and your new task of bringing Austinites together in support of an improved land development code. I also recommend that you reprise a portion of the Zucker report's methodology and administer an anonymous questionnaire to the Planning and Zoning and Development Services Department personnel. Before you administer the questionnaire, please give them some time to rest from and reflect on their CodeNext labors. But even so, I predict their responses will remain as bleak as they were back in 2014. My hope is you will find them informative when you choose among several possible courses of action. I have one specific comment based on my own observations. I watched all 63 hours of the Planning Commission's votes on amendments to CodeNext Draft 3. While doing so, one thing that became clear to me for the first time was that the Planning and Zoning and Development Services departments are very much at odds over CodeNext. DSD's view was that P&Z was proposing things they couldn't implement. The F-25 zoning category, for example. That is an example of how far back I think you have to go to restart the process to produce a new land development code. Finally, I commend you for the action you've taken regarding the assistant city managers. One of the reasons we don't have a police contract today is that the assistant city managers involved did not recognize and adapt to the 10-1 city charter changes, the kind of goal-oriented structural change that you have implemented to correct that situation is almost certainly going to be a requirement for your new assignment today. And Councilmember Poole, if your amendment passes today, I'm putting my hand up for public input. Councilmember Kitchen's chief of staff called me with a heads up for input back on August 1st, and I produced like 4 pages in 2 hours, including what you've just heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're now back up to the dais. Councilmember Poole, did you come up with some language that you think might work?
I think I just inserted the word "will take into consideration" recommendations from the city auditor. But let me speak to my amendments just to kind of lay them out. And I just wanted to preface it by saying we did vet these. My staff worked with law. Mitzi Cotton worked with Louisa Brinsmade on my staff to come up with the appropriate language for all of this. So I posted my changes to the resolution on the message board. In the first version, I included direction to the city auditor to undertake a special project, that's that 200-hour, to look at the CodeNext process. We learned that the language can't be included because of posting constraints, which is why I removed that from my amended language. But a review from our city auditor about the CodeNext process will be critical as we consider a new process of a land development code rewrite. So I'll bring this direction as a resolution at our next meeting. I think it's August 23rd. My other changes have to do with acknowledging the individuals and groups who have repeatedly communicated their concerns about the CodeNext process. I want to make sure that they know we listened and that their input is certainly a factor in this decision to move in a new direction. I really want to make sure that the public and those who attempted to help us on this hear that and understand that. I realize that any process of a land development rewrite should include a review of all of our city plans, but I would like to bring a focus to the watershed master plan if we're calling out specific plans, and I understand I'm not alone on that on the dais. It's a critical plan for a cleaner and safer future for our city. And the last item is simply looking forward to the potential of a report that emerges from the city auditor's office and asking the city manager to take those findings into account in developing a new process for the rewrite. So we can amend that rather than "and incorporates," we can say take
And considers any recommendations
Yes.
the city manager may derive.
That's correct.
Okay. Does anybody have any objection to including the amendments offered by Councilmember Poole, the addition of that whereas clause? Yes, Councilmember Kitchen?
I don't have an objection, but I just want to make a comment on it.
Sure.
Is now the appropriate time?
Sure.
Okay. I'm okay with the language, but I really want to send the message to the city manager, at least from my perspective, that my request is for the city manager to evaluate the process and to take into consideration recommendations and ideas and communication from the community, from the staff, from the consultants, from the public. And I'm not suggesting that Councilmember Poole is suggesting this. I just don't want this to be misinterpreted to mean that we are asking the city auditor to do an analysis. From my perspective, we're asking you, our city manager, to come back to us with a proposed approach. And I want you to be empowered, and I think that you are, and I hope that you are, and if you have any concerns, please let us know, to be empowered to talk to anyone and everyone that you consider appropriate to understand where we're at and to come forward with recommendations to us. And, as I've said before, from my perspective, what we're talking about here is a reboot, not a start over, not throwing out all the work that's been done to date by the many folks in the community, by our staff, by our consultants, and that I remain committed to addressing the problems that we have with our current code. So let me just ask you point blank, do you feel comfortable with the language that is being proposed as an amendment and this language in front of you, that we are asking you to consult with anyone and everyone that you consider appropriate, and that includes the community, that it includes the staff and consultants, it may include the city auditor if that comes about? Would you say that you feel comfortable with that?
I do, Councilmember.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any objection to including the language, the whereas clause?
Can I speak to it?
Yes, Flagg.
So the resolution has a number of whereas clauses, and Councilmember Poole referenced all of the hard work that our committed volunteers have done from across the city, and that is in the second to last whereas on page 2. The whereas that is proposed, I think is also important because without amending an amendment to an amendment, I feel like my input was also not included as I saw the draft go from 1 to 2 to 3. And so it is true to say many residents, businesses, and stakeholder groups expressed concerns and not reflected their input. Also that council members reflected those concerns and their input was also not included. One of the most frustrating parts of the process was watching it go from draft 1 to 2 to 3, and at no point did we take a vote. At no point did we take a formal statement and say what we wanted to see changed or adjusted or moved to. And we just saw the drafts move forward, and then we were handed a draft at the end. And partly why, and not to rehash all the stories, it's been posted. I posted my own statement on my own webpage, but what we ended up at the end was not something I felt we could get to the finish line. So I really appreciate this whereas, because I think also included are the perspectives of the council.
Sounds good. Any objection to including the whereas clause? Hearing none, the whereas clause is included. Any objection to including the last line about having the manager consider any recommendations about city auditor if such a report is done? Hearing none, that is also included. Let's take a vote on the main motion. Councilmember Alter?
Yeah, I would. I want to ask the city manager in a second for his thoughts on how the process will develop, but I wanted to just say a few words first. First, I want to thank our staff who put countless efforts, hours and hours and lots of effort and gave up lots of vacation, and no doubt their families are happy to have them back. I would like to thank our ZAP, Planning, Environmental, and other commissioners, Rika, ABOR, ANC, CNC, and all the countless people across the city who thought that this process and this land development rewrite was important enough to invest their time and energy. And I believe that I listened, and I wanted you to know that I learned from all of you. And I feel like I evolved over that time learning from each of you. I agree with the sentiment that the mayor put forward when he posted on the message board that our goal is to reestablish trust that was lost in city government and all of us here on the dais. I think, though, as we move forward, we need to recognize that uncertainty often brings anxiety, and that moving forward, we as a council need to set clear expectations and policy guidance so that the community can have less fear about what we're about what we're trying to accomplish and the product. So I hope that whatever we do as part of this process, that we keep those responsibilities of council front and center, and that we will each have the opportunity to share with City Manager Cronk and others involved in leading the next effort what we've learned through this process and ways that we think it might be better. So I would just like to ask and give the city manager in an effort to assuage some of that anxiety, some of that concern, some of that uncertainty that's out there with this idea of the end. If you can elaborate on how this process will be developed. I mentioned that I was going to ask you this on Tuesday in work session. Just to hear from you, even if it's just principles, I know this is a tough problem, and I don't expect you to have a full solution, but if you could speak for a few minutes about how you think you're going to approach this, I think that would do wonders to help dampen that level of anxiety.
Sure, Councilmember. I think if this item passes, and I will certainly start with taking the direction that I've heard this afternoon, but it really, again, as I come to the City of Austin with a fresh set of eyes and a new perspective, step one will really be ensuring that I am listening and I'm really hearing what the lessons that we've learned over the past several months and years around this process, to talk to the different stakeholders that have been identified, to talk to you to make sure that your voices are included in that conversation, and then to come back with you with some principles that would be the framework of what that recommendation of a new process going forward will be. That will take some time, so I'm not going to promise that it will be in the next day or week and even months ahead, but it is going to take some time for me to ensure that I have heard and that we can look at this from a fresh perspective.
I just want to add my thanks for the people that have worked on this really hard too, and I think that the challenges that initiated this still exist. The recognition that we need to do something about a 30-year development code still exists, but it was clear that the process we were on was not one that was trusted, and I agree with what Councilmember Alter said. We need to come up with a way to move forward that the community can trust. I gave my statement earlier on the post. Any further discussion on this?
Yes, Mayor.
Yes, Mr. Andrea?
I'd like to make a comment. I also want to thank everyone that have worked so hard, many hours on this. I just want to let people know that, we're going to delay this process, and the values of your property is not going to go down. I urged all my people in District 3, hold on to your property, because your taxes, your valuation is going to go up. Your apartment rents are going to go up because we're not building enough to meet the need of the housing in this community. And yes, there will be displacement by the people that displaced us. We're all going to get gentrified out of there, and we're not going to be able to stop that the value of your land. It's going to be impossible because people are going to be outbidding. People are spending up to 50% of their income on housing. That's how ridiculous it's gotten here in Austin, and I don't see any slowing down. It's very unfortunate that CodeNext, my whole view of CodeNext was try to build as many houses densely along the major corridors as possible. And unfortunately, the misinformation, the fake news that came out, it didn't cost much. It just took $10,000 to get this petition done, and that's what really happened. And I tried, and when I saw that we weren't going to get anywhere with this, we decided that, hey, it's not worth it. We're not going to achieve the goal that we want, and we need to take a fresh look at what we're doing. So I hope that my colleagues are very sincere on the affordability of Austin. We talk about affordability, we're talking about low-income housing, we talk about keeping the low-income people within the inner core, and I just don't see that happen. I don't even see it happening anytime soon because we're delaying a lot. But, I just want to let y'all know that, please, if you have an ability to stay on your land, either lease it or whatever, because it is going to go up and it's going to be expensive here in Austin.
Okay, let's keep going. Remind everybody we have 9 items left, and we have 45 minutes till we break for music. Yes, Mr. Kassar.
Mayor, I did have 2 questions for the city manager, just for clarification for folks. One is that I've heard a lot of folks say, well, have we put those millions of dollars of work down the drain? Has this all been for naught? That people were ready to learn about what was produced through the testing process. So my first question is around if the manager could make clear to the community what the expectation is of what's going to happen to all of that work, and whether or not you are going to keep looking at and using so that we don't pour down the drain all of that, all of everything that we've learned and put together, and whether you would see value in continuing to look at how well what we put together works. So that's my first question. And then the second question, Councilmember Alter did ask about timeline, and I wouldn't want to pin you down on a date and a month that you'd come back to us, but I think every day that we don't reform our land development code is a day we're continuing to fail our residents. And so I do think we need to get something back, not 5 years from now or a year from now. Will we get something back early next year? So just those 2 questions.
I can certainly commit to early next year. I think that's a reasonable expectation. And then I have every indication that I actually want to spend a minute just thanking the staff that has done a lot of work over the years on this effort. And to your point, there will be a lot of information and data that has been collected that will continue to be used. There's no intention to, start anew. I really appreciated the phrasing about a reboot. We're going to take what we have, but there is going to be a different look in how it's being used. But I certainly have every intention to build off of what we have really done in the past years. So I really want to thank staff for that work, but I do want to just specifically answer that question, and we will be using that information. It may come out differently, but it's certainly going to be a baseline.
Thanks. And as a co-sponsor of the resolution, I'll be the first to say that passing this doesn't fix the actual real lived problems of folks in the community, but hopefully it does open the door for us to be successful as a dais and as a city in reforming our land development code in a way that respects the facts and addresses people's need. Because I do think that there's a real commitment across the dais to do this sort of work together. And if we can come up with a new process that gets us there, then very potentially we could come up with a process that gets us there quicker even than the road that we were on. Because every day that we wait to reform our code, I don't know if I could put it better than Councilmember Renteria, but every day we wait, we're failing current residents and generations to come. I can't get out of my head the fact that over the next 25 years, it's projected that 350,000 people, definitely over 300,000 people are expected to be born or to move here, and our population is going to grow. And if the consultants were even close to right that we have around 80-something thousand in housing capacity, the amount of displacement and unaffordability that that's going to cause if we don't plan for that is just unacceptable. And I just wouldn't feel like I did my job, regardless of the politics of it, regardless of how good or bad it makes any of us look. My conscience wouldn't rest if I didn't do something about that. And so I'm glad that the manager is going to bring something back early next year so that we can reform in this area in 2019 and do all the other important work we have to do. We need housing bonds. We need investment in infrastructure. We need to deal with flooding, but we can't avoid addressing the issues with our code, or at least I can't with a good conscience. So I look forward to continuing to work with the community and this council and the staff on this in 2019.
Sounds good. Ready to take a vote? Those in favor of item number, yes, Councilor Kitchen.
I'm sorry, just one other thing. I mentioned earlier that that I remain committed to addressing the problems that we've identified with our land development code, and I just want to reiterate that. And I also want to reiterate that means the kinds of problems that we've talked about up here, but it includes our environmental issues, our water quality issues, our flood mitigation issues, and the whole range of issues, even beyond zoning, that are covered by the land development code.
Okay, let's take a vote. Those in favor of 111, please raise your hand. Those opposed? 111 passes unanimously.